Once I've created that space where I can be more objective about it, it can give me insights. So once I start to understand, once I start questioning and I start to understand, okay, I had a really terrible experience with a dog when I was 6 years old. And so now dogs, you know, a barking dog sends fear into me, right? I'm an adult, I'm a grown-ass person, so I can manage that on a conscious level. But when I'm startled by it, I react. Does that make sense? I'm making this up, but does that make sense? So by understanding that and recognizing the base emotion there was fear, when we work from a medical Qigong perspective, when we work on fear, we come in and create wisdom. So we don't dismiss it as saying, well, that's a kid, the kid was afraid and, you know, it's no big deal, I'm an adult now, I can handle it. We need to address it from that perspective that we have inside ourselves that's still reacting with a lot of fuel. Follow me? Because you're all muted, if you have a question, just raise your hand. I'm watching everybody. I'm watching you. So with that, once we have identified that and we're able to work with it, we can create wisdom around it. And so how do we do that? Well, we want to look at, you know, animal behavior, but we want to understand the wisdom for me would be in and around the trauma that I experienced as a child around a dog, right? Because to me, the trigger that's going on at this point in time is simply a flashlight that says, hey, go look back here. This is where it comes from. And it could be one event. It could be multiple events that stack on each other because they're the same frequency. So an example, kind of staying with the simplistic dog barking example, if I had a traumatic event at 6 years old, let's just put this up here. I had a traumatic event at 6 years old related to large dog barking, got bit, hospital visit, stitches, Novocaine, all 9 yards, debriding wound, bad deal, very uncomfortable and terrifying for a little kid, right? So, but the dog barked before he bit me. So there's that connection, the sound connection, then the physical pain. Now, later on, another dog barks at me and growls and everything, but it's that same, it doesn't bite me, but it's that same frequency of fear. Does that make sense? It's the same frequency. Then later on, another situation, maybe this one does nip at me a little bit or something, but it's adding to the fuel, right? And so by the time I'm an adult, I can consciously, I can come in and say, I can reason this away. That's a little dog, they're not going to bite me, I'm fine, right? So as an adult, I can overpower, I can use my mind to overpower the emotional and physical responses that I'm experiencing in my body. But does that solve anything? I can overpower it, I can force it back down into the cellar. But as one of my teaching partners, a really brilliant person, she used to say is, you know, when your feelings go down to the basement, they go down there to lift weights. And they will come back up at some point in time and kick your ass. And so that's important to understand, is we don't want to just mentally create this block here that says, I'm an adult. That's a childish fear because I've had, you know, a dozen dogs since then and none of them have bit me, so that's just wrong, or it's just I'm done with it, and put a wall there. That doesn't help, because that wall comes from the reasoning brain, right? But the trigger happens in the reactionary brain. Does that make sense? I haven't thought about it yet. I have reacted to it. Now, if we take all these events and we stack them a little bit differently, I'm going through life, right? Life cycling through, everything's golden. I have good days, I have bad days, but things are moving along. But that one dog incident, and then another one, and another one, and another one. And now every time I'm near a dog, I'm not down here operating on a smooth, up and down. I'm up here cycling in a state of fear. Does that make sense? So I'm not, like if this is 0 and this is 100, or let's say this is 80 and 100 is up here, I am no longer operating in I'm calm and then I can get excited. I'm operating in another level because of these steps I took, like Richard mentioned, the straw that broke the camel's back. This comes when you have multiple events, multiple instances of boundary challenge or whatever a particular circumstance is. We're looking at fear at this point. If I've had numerous experiences with fear that I haven't resolved, I haven't come to a place of peace with them, then they're going to be sitting idle underneath. And that's going to start to shift my psyche, and my being is going to adapt to what I call a new normal. So now I have a baseline fear of, let's just use a random number of 80 from 0 to 100. 0 is no fear, 100 is full on freak out. And I'm idling at 80. Now, because I'm idling there, it feels normal. My being will adjust to that, to where it feels like I'm not afraid. But, okay, I got you, Marcia. But in that, inside my being, I'm vibrating at a much higher level so that anything else that comes in will send me right over the top very quickly. I don't have time to respond. My reaction sends me to overwhelm. Let me unmute you, Marcia. Okay, Marcia, question?
2 questions, and maybe you're going to get there, but so like on the scale, if you're at 80 in the example of the dog, is it just you're at 80, your fear is at 80 when you're around the dog, or has it moved your fear up for every situation that would ever cause fear? That's one question. And then how do you get that wisdom? Maybe if in the dog situation, how would you get the wisdom to counteract the dog bite at age 6 and the other things?
Thank you. So, first part of that is good in that we can experience fear from a lot of different angles, right? So, it could be that the dog experience was one, and then we had resonant frequencies with that particular experience that are there. And then we could have another layer of fear from other things, other events that haven't been resolved. It can stack up that way. So it really, it's person specific, it's experience specific as to which piece is most intense. Does that answer it? Or okay. With regards to how do you resolve it, it is, I mean, in Qigong and medical Qigong particularly, and you've heard me say this 100 times for those of you who've been with me, it depends. It depends on the circumstances for that particular individual and where they are today. When I'm doing the work in the outpatient clinic and the chemical dependency and, working with addictions of all kinds, I don't look at the patient files before I meet them because where they've been is much less important to me than where they are. And meeting them where they are creates a sense of, okay, I'm not being judged for where I've been. I can just accept where I am and move forward from there. But in the case of this dog bite situation, you can have there's number of different ways to create wisdom in that. One is to spend time with dogs and build up a library of counter evidence, right? Where you've had one dog that, got scared and bit you and it was a bad, attack, but you have all this counter evidence of dogs being man's best friend, right? And so that's one way to do it, but you have to come to a place of peace with that particular attack. Sometimes we, and this is where it depends on the individual, is the person that's experiencing the fear, do they have guilt or shame or anything like that wrapped around that event? Because we've talked about trauma before, and if you remember, trauma will lock in all 5 senses into a deeper, a high definition memory in the primal brain. It'll lock in all 5 senses. So if I have guilt or shame or something that I'm internalizing about that event, right? Then that will create this kind of a Kevlar around, this shield around that prevents me from accessing those emotions and doing anything about it. It's almost like because of this guilt or shame, I don't feel I deserve to be healed from it. So I'm continuing to punish myself on a subconscious level. Does that make sense? This is huge, particularly in veterans or the cops that I've worked with. This is huge awareness is, what am I, because I've got some veterans that I've worked with that are holding on to stuff from the 1990s, from Vietnam. I had one I worked with years ago from World War II that was still holding on. I think I worked with him 60 years post the event, but he was still holding on to a sense of guilt because he, as a good Marine, didn't have a choice but to leave somebody, one of his unit members behind until things settled, and then they died in the meantime. So it's like they went and got him after, but they couldn't get him and help him survive. There was just too much heavy fire. And so there was a tremendous amount of guilt there. So there was a lot of trauma around that event, but the guilt that was wrapped around it would not let him access it to heal. And so this is where a lot of the it depends comes in. It's like, where am I coming from? But at the bottom of it is coming to a place of peace with an event like that requires an acceptance that this happened, and whatever the circumstances were around it, I've come to a place of peace with it. If somebody else was to blame, then I want to come to a place of acceptance that it's like, this is who they were at that moment in time. And there's no way they could have shown up any different because of their background and who they were in that moment, right? I mean, even at any one of us at any moment in time is only acting in the only way we can at that moment. So if I'm having a good day, I may be, the best version of myself. But if my pain levels are up, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I've had a lot of pressure on me, and I bark at somebody, right? Even though that's not a good version of me, that is the best I can muster at that moment in time. And so as an outsider, if I'm the one that got barked at, if I can say, yeah, I understand this was painful for me, but this is who they were, and this is what they could do. That was, for me, because of the molestations when I was a kid, that was a really hard place for me to go. But when I was able to go there and let that go, all of that power came back to me. And the peace that came with that was powerful. So I think I took a long walk on a long pier on that one. But I unmuted you, Marcia. Does that clarify anything?
Thank you very much. That helps.
Okay. Any other questions on this at this point? Okay. Is there any yeah buts? No? Really? So if we're looking at this model of escalation where event after event after event continues to feed this base level pain, I'll say, whether it's, you know, mental pain, emotional pain, this can be just as much anxiety as it can be fear or anger. It can go to the other side on the downside and be depression or sadness or grief or guilt, or, you know, so anything that feels overwhelming, it can be on this scale. And the practices like the breath work, the metronome, everything that we've been working on this month, the reason we talk about triggers in this month is because with the breath, what that does is that it takes me out of this fixation and allows me to open my mind back up. Because I'm not traveling in the future. You know, if you think about the future past, future here, past here, my breath is now. I can only breathe right now. And if I can get strong into my breath, then I can create perspective and see the future for what it is, which is future. Even if it's 10 minutes from now, it's still future or past. I can have anger over something in the past, or sadness or grief or guilt, but I want to be able to hold space for myself in the now so that I can process these things outside of, process these things to a clarity, to a sense of clarity, right? So, you know, Marcia is using you as an example Friday night when you had that emotional space. I hope, I trust that you know, with the work that you and I have done together, to be able to just kind of settle into that and let it move through you to a place of peace. Is that what happened? Awesome. Yeah, because you know you've got that overwhelm comes in. Let's say it's an emotional overwhelm. We don't want to stifle it. We want to let it up and let it through. But we want to stay grounded. So there's this intention of coming into ground, coming into quiet while the emotion is moving up and out, so that I can then observe it objectively and allow it to move through. Where are we? Okay. What kind of questions might you have? I've unmuted everybody at this point. Are there any questions on what we've covered?
An observation. As I looked at the trigger as a flashlight, and I practiced grounding myself with breath and centers, then I could use the flashlight to see and investigate where might this be coming from. And as I got clearer on what the core was, I found that I began with breath to nurture the core of that child and give that child compassionate presence, and allowing him to feel that his experience was okay and that he's not at fault for having it, and he doesn't have to be bigger and pretend it's not there. So I found that compassionate nurturing in what the core issue was really allowed me to settle and kind of bring a place of peace and acceptance that I had not yet experienced. It was the nurturing.
Right. The term I use in compassionate is neutral compassion. So I want to be present to who I was at that point in time, the people around me. You know, I mean, if it was a dog in the example that we've been playing with, what were the circumstances that caused that dog to be aggressive? You know, it could be that, you know, they were afraid, or, you know, whatever the circumstances, trying to create a place of compassion for that particular creature. and compassion for myself and how I reacted to it or how I experienced it. I'm not wrong for being scared. I'm not bad for being scared or weak or something like that, right? So there's a lot to the acceptance. Once we, the triggers are a flashlight, like I said, and we want to start to question and look at it objectively, keep the emotions out of it, and see things as from a broader perspective instead of the right, wrong, good, bad mindset that we have a tendency to lock into when we get in fight or flight.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Other questions, comments? Okay, so homework we've got. I think we're going to stay with minding the breath through the week. We've worked on hand practices, open closed fingertips, Dantian breathing or 4-direction breath, 6-direction breath, circular breathing, tactical breath or box breath, metronome breath. We've played with a lot of different practices this month. Pick one and really work it this week. Every day, 5 minutes. And give yourself a really good anchor point for it. And I will be asking about it. But giving yourself, we'll use next week as a review of the different practices and touch point on anything, that is coming up for you. Observing the triggers is really important. If you need some help with that or whatnot, keep in mind that I'm available for sessions to talk through anything specific, but things that we can't go into a lot of depth on a call like this. But giving yourself permission to just explore, question, where's that coming from really? Another good question to ask is, when was the first time I felt this energy? So if you get triggered, like Jaden mentioned, the loud noise, the argument, yelling kind of thing, that is a deep trigger for him. So being able to connect with that and say, when was the first time I remember feeling that? Because once you have that historic timeline, you can start to resolve the more intense experiences, and then the other ones will start to unravel on their own. Because every time that I'm able to resolve a measure of intensity around something, the other ones lose their grip a little bit. Right? And every time I do that, I get a little bit better at it, I get a little wiser, and it makes it a little easier to go after the next challenge. Anything else? Yeah, Marcia? You muted yourself. Okay.
So I have a question, and if it's could be deferred to next week, or if it's too long an answer, it's okay. But I've noticed, like on a lot of the meditation things I've heard, sometimes I hear people recommending that the exhale should be longer than the inhale. And I know you've just given us a lot of different things to play with and to try. I'm curious about that, like if there's a reason that when to employ that versus like a circular breath and keeping things even.
Well, having a longer exhale is said to stimulate the rest, digest, and heal, the parasympathetic side of the nervous system. So it's a de-escalation tool. I mean, that's a valid tool as well. There's a lot of different, there's dozens and dozens of different breath practices. And it's a matter of finding one that feels good to you. And really, it's more a matter of finding the several that feel good to you, because there's no one master breath practice that is going to solve all of even one person's problems, or not solve the problems, but bring them to a place of peace every single time. It's not going to happen. We're too dynamic, and we experience things on 3 different levels, mental, emotional, physical. And so the breath practice that helps me settle now may not be any good for me tomorrow, depending on my circumstances. Right? So I want to have a toolbox. That's why I give you so many different practices to play with. So I want you to have a toolbox. The long exhale is a good practice. I don't incorporate it a whole lot because I'm looking to balance the system, not create a favorite, right? But that's just a personal preference. It's not that it's right, wrong, bad. But if there's other, I mean, now I'll say this: there's been a lot of talk about the Wim Hof Method recently. He's done some amazing things, and he's proven that he can teach those amazing things to other people with his techniques. And I know that, like in the outpatient clinic, some of the people that are coming out of the 45-day intensive have been taught the Wim Hof Method, and it's a controlled hyperventilation. And there's a breath holding pattern and a release, and it releases endorphins. It stimulates the nervous system very strongly. But it is, to me, as I've looked at it, because I've had a couple of teachers recommend it to me, played with it a little bit. But what I found for me was that it was stimulating the sympathetic nervous system to a heightened state so that then it could drop it. So to me, if I've already got somebody that's in a heightened state of fight or flight, I don't want to exacerbate that before they exhaust that and come down, right? It's a little bit like what I've described to some of you guys. When I was angry, I would go out and pound on the bags or get in the ring or whatever and fight. And I would get exhausted. I would exhaust my physical ability to fight. And then I could think, and I was calm. So it was like, this is good. As long as I fight, I can stay calm. Well, I wasn't doing anything to resolve the underlying emotions. I was simply exhausting my ability to act on them. Very different. So I suspect, and I've been playing with this a little bit, and in my conversations with some of the patients, I'm finding that Wim Hof method has its purpose. It's not a bad method. It's just that trying to combat anxiety with it, I don't think is the right idea. I think it's a misplaced tool. So really the best person to know which breath practice is for you is you. That's why I give so many different tools, because I'm not going to pretend to know this practice is for you and this practice is for you and you don't need anything else, right? So, but we do know that bringing attention to the breath brings you closer to this moment in time and gives you the best opportunity to settle overwhelm. And the stronger you get in that space, the more you can look at the future or the past overwhelms in an objective light. And that's the goal. Other questions? All right, guys. Well, I thank you for your time and attention.